But this epidemic is going to need to run its course at this point. I mean, New York is having epidemic levels of spread. That's going to continue for some weeks before we see the peak in this. That peak is likely to happen sometime in April, mid-April to late April, probably more likely late April or early May. And remember, this right now is epidemic in New York City. We likely have other large cities that are similarly seeded that are a couple of weeks behind New York. So we're going to see other cities probably have the same level of spread or something close to it as New York. Hopefully not as bad because they implemented some mitigation steps earlier. But certain cities like New Orleans were late to this and seem to have spread right now. And so you have to be very worried that they're going to also have large outbreaks.
Dr. Gottlieb, Dr. Birx tonight in that news conference said 28% of tests in New York City are positive versus 8% elsewhere. It's to the point you're making about the hotspot that New York City is. When is an appropriate time to go back to work? How many weeks are we talking about?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to see this epidemic peak and in those cases come down. And so it's maybe another 6 to 7 weeks till a peak, and in 6 or 7 weeks until it comes down. I think it's going to be very hard to fully take our foot off the brake until you start to see some significant declines in the number of new cases on a daily basis. And there's going to be continued increases in new cases for some time now. We're just at the beginning of this. We're about 2 weeks into this right now. And so what you do towards the end of the epidemic spread is you start to substitute in case-based interventions, trying to identify cases, isolate individual people, as opposed to mitigation tactics where you're isolating an entire population. So you can slowly take your foot off the brake as you introduce those case-based interventions, but you need to have the tools in place to do that, and that requires very massive screening, and we don't have that in place yet. Hopefully by April, May, we'll have that in place, and we'll start to be able to make this substitution very slowly like China did. But you can't take your foot off the brake too quickly or the epidemic can flare again.
Do you feel as though the president and the medical experts, doctor, are on the same page tonight?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the discussions that are going on in the White House right now. I think that there is a desire among some to try to look for ways that we could isolate regions, isolate states, and intervene more aggressively in the places where transmission is continuous and epidemic, and maybe less so in places where it isn't. The problem for the United States right now, dissimilar from China, is that we're likely to have epidemic spread in multiple regions. We have multiple hotspots taking shape. China was able to largely isolate this to the Hubei province. They had outbreaks in other cities, but it really became only epidemic in the Hubei province. And so they were able to also move in massive resources into that province and into Wuhan. They literally brought thousands of doctors from other parts of the country into Wuhan. We're probably not going to be able to do that because while New York is the first to fall, we're likely to see epidemic spread in other cities. Seattle looks very hot, San Francisco, Chicago. You have to worry about any city that has a mass transit system because this seems to be spreading through contaminated surfaces. And so mass transit can become a vehicle by which this is spreading. So Chicago, New Orleans, parts of Florida. Florida was late to implement mitigation tactics statewide. And so is Louisiana. So you have to worry about those cities, that they're heavily seeded at this point. We're going to need to keep a very close eye on them.